Yeah. Wave to people.
Hello. As I look like a cripple today.
We can't tell that from you just sitting there.
I know, but if I move at all, I'm like,
And we're all seeing the show. Wave to the audience. They're all coming in.
Hi, Odie.
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hmm.
turn your alerts off.
People chiming in on the chat already. Getting started in 1 minute, folks. Letting people get in. All right, we'll get started. It's 3:02. Well, hello, everyone. My name is David DiLorenzo of Association Analytics, and once again, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our Thursday afternoon virtual discussion series, where we bring together leaders and learners each week to talk about fun and engaging sessions at optimizing your business and staying relevant in these challenging times. This is going to be a really fun session today, so it is almost happy hour. I always encourage you to go ahead and grab a refreshing summer beverage, and let's get started with our session. Today's session, one of my favorite topics, something we talk about a lot, I hear a lot, things are always changing around our ecosystems. We're going to be talking about best of breed data ecosystem. Just a couple of notes for some of you, maybe first-time attendees. There's always going to be a recording. We do record these sessions, so if you missed this one, you can view it through the website where you registered. If you have to skip out, you don't get to stay for the whole time. And as always, we want to hear from you. These are meant to be interactive. We're going to be doing a lot of the talking, but we want to hear from you through the chat and the Q&A button if you want to submit questions. And we'll have some opportunity to take some of those questions as we go through the program today. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you to our panel. We are very honored today to have the team of Delcorians. I'm not going to do individual bios. I think I can introduce Delcor as a whole as a leading technology consulting group in our community space. We are joined by Loretta DeLuca, the owner of Delcor, Gretchen Steenstra, one of the strategic consultants at Delcor, and Dan Hickey, also a strategic consultant. So say hello, everybody.
Greetings.
Good afternoon.
We're excited to have him here. I know this is something we've all probably talked about for years and years and years. So it's fun to do this webinar.
It's become official.
Yeah,
Yes.
not just talking about it in a boardroom somewhere.
That's right.
Get it out there for the world. And for me, I said this is kind of like getting the team back together. As a former Delcorian, and Gretchen always gives me a little heck about always having some kind of theme for all my presentations.
That's
so
right. Today's bowling.
Together as a bowling group. I know Delcor group have definitely done a lot of bowling over the years at many different venues and events. So
The Broadmoor comes to mind.
We've done great ideas in Florida. Somehow we always end up on a bowling alley somewhere.
Yeah.
So it feels good to have the bowling team back together. And for those of you who are just now logging in, if you got in a little bit late, just a reminder, you are in a virtual session called Best of Breed Data Ecosystem. So welcome. Now we're going to kind of kick in and get started. What are we here to talk about today? As I said, the title kind of says a lot of it, but we really want to, we want to focus a little bit on the big picture. How did we get here? What everybody's been working with a variety of systems in their ecosystem for many, many years. How do we get to today? What's been going on? Delcor's works a lot with tons of different clients on tons of different systems. So we're going to talk a little bit about them, with what they're seeing out there, how we got here today, what brought us to that. And then we're going to get into a little bit of ecosystem strategy and how are modern organizations really thinking about their ecosystems with a new mindset around data and really that need to collect data, be smart about data, really use data to inform decision making and drive the business forward. And then kind of now what? You're going to hear a bunch of probably big ideas, but how do you really get started? What are some tactics and practical application? We're going to do as much of this as we can in about 45 minutes. So hold on to your seats and get some questions ready. So we will start with the big picture. See, bowling pin. So this is really meant to look like an old graphic because this individual graphic has probably been something we've looked at for, what do you think, Gretchen? 20 years?
20 yeyears, yep.
Over, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not meant to look like anything fun or new. But the old model, which most organizations have been in, when you think about an ecosystem, I guarantee you every AMS vendor probably had an ecosystem model map that looked something like this 10, 12, 15, 2 years ago, where the AMS was in the middle and every other function or system was kind of just a spoken hub model where there wasn't any interconnectivity between all those other hubs or those other spokes out there. It was kind of
Yeah, it was a closed ecosystem. It was a closed ecosystem.
It was a closed, connected ecosystem, right?
Although I will say, David, that it started out by being best of breed out there many, many moons ago. You guys only went so far as to say 20 years, so as the old timer here. I did the first selection in '91 for Delcor. And even before that, they were modeled in a very best of breed way.
That's true.
So this wasn't really the original model.
So we're back.
I'd say original.
Got full circle.
Old model.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
I'm here to bring the historic perspective.
But
Older, not old, yes.
I think that's important, Loretta, because that's kind of the evolutionary piece. Dan, you were going to say something?
Right.
I was just going to say older, not old model, but yes, we've talked about this. I know it's been a problem for a long time. I think a lot of the issue with this also is how you get data out of the system. You got data is trapped, and relying on the AMS reporting capabilities has been very problematic for a number of years. There's nothing really new there, but that's, we were relying on that as kind of the main way of getting the data out. That in itself saw shortcoming.
Yeah, and I think that, how do you get here, which was the question we asked a little bit, and it was, Loretta, yeah, absolutely. I think there was best of breed, but back then an AMS really probably did one or two things. It did membership, accounting and invoicing and some things really tied to tracking the members, not the 47 things that it may do now. And as those kind of collapsed into the AMS or had integrated into specific modules in the AMS, then you started managing a lot of integrations just to feed modules of an AMS that might not have served your need, but stored the data. So then the data became trapped in AMSs and you couldn't get it out to do anything with, became hard to report, certainly hard to do analytics, but impossible to really connect all those systems around that, might need a piece of that data so then you had to rebuild that integration across the board. That's why I kind of say data got trapped.
But then it actually went full circle way back then where the AMS tried to become everything.
Right.
So you remember the old legacy systems that actually had a full financial all the financial account modules built into it. So they tried to get rid of all the ancillary systems and become everything to everybody.
Right.
And it was like that for some years until it started to break apart again. And the financial management system is the prime example of the one thing that was successfully dislodged from the AMS, and then integrations were built to some degree. I mean, to me, that's one of the simplest integrations.
Right.
And even that the organizations didn't do an amazing job with, but in any case, now it's starting to go back to the best of breed, which is what we're talking about.
Right. And then David, I think we'll talk in a few minutes about now data is going to go into the center,
Yeah.
but I bet the same pattern is going to happen, right? So data systems are going to try to be the everything to everybody. And so when we talk about strategy, I think that's like learn from what we've done before and don't just repurpose it, rename everything and just take all your problems with you. Because that's what makes me smile, right? We just keep switching out the center. Is the center the AMS? Is it the customer? Is it data? But we never really solve some of these connection problems in the.
Sounds like that's a good time for a poll question.
Okay,
So
poll question.
as we think about this, we're going to push a poll question up to everybody. And the question is, is your AMS the central hub of your data system? So take a second or two to, I don't know if that's popped up yet or not. Huh?
I'm just, Tim is saying it's cyclical for sure. Let's just keep
Yeah, give
going.
me a second to look at things.
Oh, here, we see it.
There it is.
Absolutely. I think we go through the same processes as you said to kind of get some of this stuff to the center. But it's also, we're going to talk a little bit about more around, size matters too. You can't do everything with a small org.
Right.
And so does skill, right? You don't want to.
Skill, size, strategy.
All the S's.
All the S's. Any other notes coming? All right, everybody take a second to vote, and I'm going to go ahead and have Brian push out the results. It looks like 72% do have the AMS at the center of their ecosystem, but there are a lot of ancillary systems that store information. And that's really what I would expect to see. And
yeah, it's not surprising.
A very small percentage just has it as one of many systems and not considered the most important. That's, 2 people answered that out of everybody. So that's, I would probably have expected to see those results.
Yeah.
But that's good news, right? That people have kind of started to build an ecosystem out. It's good.
And I would actually, at some point, it would be great to talk to those people who it's one of many systems.
Yeah.
So
we'll find out who they are.
Find out who they are.
That's
so kind of within the point we were talking about and what we're going to get into today, and we're going to start really big picture and work our way down. This is what we were just talking about, and what are those differences? Yeah, we just keep putting different. We're starting to decouple that and make it, more a system of ancillary systems, other applications, right? So, I think, Gretchen, what I'm hearing you say, we're just putting a different thing at the center. So when I break apart this model and I think through, it's really breaking some of that up: people, skills, having good strategy, having the right stack, having the right channels for where information is coming from. But then it is really going to be, having good systems and good processes that really drive some of that.
Right. And Michael and Tim were saying it's a better word would be a spiral, not just a circle, right? The spiral, you're at least making some improvements along the way.
Well, that's why this graphic looks so much better than the old one. We're even maturing in how we draw it. So, what do you, I guess there's a lot of new environments out there around data. I'm going to show a couple of models, and I'm going to have you guys kind of talk around what you're seeing, what this looks like. Because I think there's no one way to do this. I think that's what we're going to come through today. It's just going to require a lot of, thought, strategy, process, the right people, the right systems. But, you can work with data in a variety of ways. It's really, how do you want your data to talk? What needs to talk to what? How? What do you need to store? What do you need to analyze? And there's a lot of questions that need to be answered.
And I think one of the first things that is one of Dan's hallmarks is data literacy, I think is a phrase Dan uses, where I think the first problem people have is everyone has a different definition and they assume that everyone else is sharing their definition. And so wires get crossed right out of the gate. And then I think the second thing is who's responsible for things. So when you have all of the different partners feeding data in and out, it's sometimes really hard to troubleshoot or manage, because who do I go to if some of my data doesn't look right or something happens? So I think those are 2 things that are, as we mature and evolve, those are things you have to start with.
Yeah, that's still a reoccurring issue that we're seeing a lot of. I think there's, the data literacy. There's still a heavy reliance on IT. Of course, you need IT at the table, but it needs to go beyond that in terms of, again, how you're accessing it, how are you using it, how are you interpreting it. I like the idea of how do you argue with it, meaning how do you actually use data in a consistent way and to make your points and validate certain points. So that's where we're seeing some immaturity still in the market. I think there's desire to move. One thing we are seeing in a good way is a lot of our clients are wanting to move in this direction, but there's still some areas they're getting stuck on, and the data literacy is one of them.
I mean, it's just like digital transformation, the term that's been used now for the last few years. it's so much about culture,
Mhm.
right? And so pretty much all technology, really, a lot of it has to do with culture. And especially when it comes to data, right? I mean, who owns it? Who's going to be in charge of it? Who's going to be responsible for it? Of what systems? Who's going to run? I mean, there's so much around that. It goes back to the people, that the right topmost part there. So,
And I
Yeah,
think,
it even touches
yeah, Dave.
culture is an important word. I mean, and like business needs, or the business needs have evolved.
absolutely.
Before it was the run to the IT department, the run me report. Now I've got mature systems that are sitting on the periphery that maybe are loosely connected to the AMS just from a login standpoint, but I get my own data. So I'm running my own pieces out of that. I'm doing my own reporting out of those systems. But eventually somebody wants that whole 360 view. So I think that's some of that evolution too, is that tech stack, those systems have evolved and gotten more mature, and don't always, to your point, don't always require IT. IT might just be the connector, but they're not the owner and the operator anymore.
Right. And David, you and I talked recently about the data needs to be a persona. Everybody talks about when they're building out any system, what are the user journeys or the personas of the member, the customer, non-members, board members, all these demographics. But I think we need to have data have 2 or 3 personas. Like,
we're going to talk about that in a little bit, Gretchen. So,
we're gonna. I'm ahead.
We get there. Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's one of these things in these ecosystems. It needs to be more personalized and not just so system focused. And I think it, like you were saying, like bring the business in, bring everybody into the conversation and make it more of an organic thing rather than these standalone kind of cold ideas.
And I'm sure you guys see a ton of models. So I'm going to, what does this look like? So for the practical application for the people, let's look at a couple of basic models and what we see. If you're looking at, this is our product, we're a data company. So Acumen's kind of at the middle of things, but not necessarily. It's in the middle of everything, but not the center of anything, if that makes sense. We're really set up to gather all that data and store it. But as I said, it's really for business purposes. We're not just storing data to do straight reporting and gathering numbers. We think of data, well, that's part of it because that's a need, it's another business need. Our role, and when we're thinking analytics, kind of in the centerpiece of this, it's to drive business, retain members, to draw in members, to grow event attendance, to see who's engaged and not engaged, to measure different results, to member acquisition or customer acquisition, depending on what you're doing, and really, allowing you to spend your dollar in a better way to make sure you're targeting effectively and doing different things. And it just ties into any system. You see AMS is just any one of the systems that when analytics, and there's a platform like Acumen at the center of it, we're integrating really with everything equally, with the goal of having a collection of data that can then be interpreted together.
But David, isn't this more of like a 3D model where depending on where you are?
It is.
So like analysis can only happen once the data is available to analyze, right? So Acumen or any data analytics, Power BI or any of the competitor means nothing without any data to put in.
Yes, definitely layers here.
Sure.
Zoom doesn't let me, or PowerPoint doesn't do good 3D models.
I know, right? But I think that's what people forget too, that as they're putting the data into the ecosystem, they have to think about how it's going to come out and the other way around.
Well,
otherwise it makes it really difficult.
Well, also fundamentally, what are the questions that they're trying to answer? Right, that's a huge component of where data needs to go and how we're trying to get it out. What are the business questions we're trying to answer? How is data going to support our strategy, our mission, our business objectives?
Yeah, exactly, Loretta. When we talk to clients, that's where a lot of the conversation is about, because I know everyone likes their the dashboards and whatnot, but really at the end of the day, what are you doing with the data, and is it really helping you advance any of this? The other thing is just focus on core areas. I think when we talk to some of our clients, they just get overwhelmed with all the options you can do, and really focus on just a handful of key initiatives that really drive those business decisions.
Right, and then it's like you think about all these systems out on the periphery now that used to only gather a little bit of information, but now each and every system you plug in is gathering a multitude, an incredible amount of data. You know, you used to have a reg system, just, you know, grab the basic information and dump it into the AMS. Well, now it's gathering all kinds of information about you and different demographics and behavioral information and things it does on the website. So, you know, that, I think it is that thought process of, as I plug in systems and do new things, to Gretchen's point, what are all the layers? What are all the touch points? What is the interactivity? How is that structured out? And are we thinking all the way through this every time we do something or add something in? Another model that we're seeing out there, and we're starting to see, I just had a call on it today, we're starting to see, which is kind of a little bit of the return of middleware in a cloud version. But what, you know, the data hub model, are you guys seeing that with clients, and what do you think the, you know, where are you seeing that, and what is the prominence of that right now?
We're seeing this with more mature organizations. Like Dan said, this takes a lot more skill, and you kind of have to go through the first stage to get here. So I'm not seeing this every day, but this is a conversation that's happening right now.
Yeah,
exactly. I'd say this, and the reality is, yes. I mean, I think the conversations are just starting to happen, but I think Mark Bernstein on the spot. I saw him just post something in there, but because I know certain organizations that are a little more on the mature side are trying to pursue this, but the majority of ours are just not there. They have out there, and I think they're still trying to get their bearings of how they really want to leverage their data. But I think it's something to aspire. But
and I don't think a lot of the vendors are there either, Dan. Do you? Like, so just like, I think there's 3 levels of maturity, or like the users who are trying to do it, the systems, right? And then all the connector tools, like they're all kind of maturing at the same rate. You can't have one without the other. So I think, David, it's only been recently that even some of these connector tools could do this well, you know, without a lot
there's
of
the cost considerations too. I mean, there are large, obviously, organizations and for profit too that are doing a lot of this, but you've looked at the pricing, and a lot of that is quite expensive too. So price point's a deterrent too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll, you know, make sure we take a stab at kind of explaining the data hub model is, you know, kind of a whole nother set of system where you're really plugging, you know, this is where the AMS is kind of outside there in the universe, and it's just another data source. And people are starting to call it member data platform. I'm starting to hear that term a lot. And it's adjacent to, can be adjacent to a data warehouse like ours, but that data hub becomes kind of the connector. And I guess the model is really the simplest plug and play integration layer that I can have, where it's easy for me to move systems, and those systems can talk to each other and just get the pieces of information they need out of that data hub in order to transact and provide the user experience on the other side to either staff, members, chapters, various partners, and allows me to have a multitude of systems. So, you know, I hear, and this is, I'm gonna ask you guys, every time something new comes in the market, like, oh yeah, maybe I won't need an AMS now.
Right.
So I hear that again. It's like, oh, if I have my data warehouse and then I have a good data hub and it's connected to all the systems and they're talking to each other, do I still need an AMS?
You need an input. You need somewhere to put it. I don't know, and maybe the AMS needs to be replaced back. I mean, they, again, like Loretta said, started just with customer information, and then it became everything, and maybe it just needs to shrink back down to the touch point for the customer. So you have some point of reference.
So let me ask you a question, right? Playing devil's advocate. If there is the AMS and it does do a good job of allowing you to manage your events, or it does do a good job of letting you manage your membership and selling your products, whatever they are, why wouldn't you do that? It's to minimize the number of applications you have. I mean, you know, Gretchen, when we help our clients select association management systems, it's kind of the 80-20 rule, right? I mean, we're trying to get a system that meets 80% of the needs reasonably well. The critical needs need to be met very well, right? The really critical things where the revenue comes into the organization. And then there's the 20% that we say, well, you're going to need something else. And maybe that's not the model, or that's not the measure going forward. But my question is, do we just get rid of the AMS? Is that really what's going to happen? I don't see that happening.
I don't see that anytime soon either.
And maybe it's because I have such a history with this that I'm like, you know, really reticent to let it go. And maybe that, you know.
Yeah, and I think to Gretchen's point, like even in the next 5 years, what percentage in our space is really going to be mature enough to think through and manage a lot of this and have the probably the budget and the staff to really get all this stuff going outside of an AMS, and it's going to be a small number. So I think there's, this is just the newest model. I call this, a lot of this becomes AMS adjacent, not AMS replacement. So it's pulling some things out.
But Evan had a good point, and I'm trying to read the chat too, that the AMS can share the center, right? It doesn't have to be only one.
Nothing has to be in the center, right? It's 3D. It's all over.
And then I think when people are building this model, sometimes what's in one system, it may be the AMS or the event management system, you could split those into even more specialty systems, but sometimes you do have to stay with that 80. It's good enough, and really choose how many partners you can manage to do a good job.
Yeah.
I mean, I know we're going to talk about this later, but the question that keeps coming into my head is, who's going to make this work? Right? I mean, it all sounds really good in theory.
Right, let's get into some of the strategy and talk about that thing. We'll move forward.
Time to disrupt, Loretta.
Disruptive, Loretta. That's what we like about you. So, how many people kind of feel this way in their organization, especially if they're in, sitting in the IT department or some of the other departments? What's the big new idea? Of course, we're collecting data from everywhere, and what are we going to do with all of it? Well, we don't know.
Right.
And I think what we're trying to say is that should be the first thing you know, not backward. Right. You should be wanting to know exactly what you're going to do with it, and then you work your way backwards into those systems and that stack. So I'm going to throw up here, we had a webinar last year, it was a lot on the MarTech stack and the connectivity and the connective tissue between a lot of the marketing systems and AMS systems. And this is an actual client's set of systems. So, they were very purposeful in what they wanted to do, what needed to be connected. And Loretta, you said, who's going to do this? And I said, this is a fairly large organization, as Gretchen referenced before. But I think, and I'm guessing this is the kind of models you're going to start thinking through and building out. And I'm sure this is just, full of logos, but I'm guessing there's all kinds of inflow, outflow data maps that are going through those and decision trees around what's stored where and why, and what's the master rules. So when you think about this as we go through, and this is a really fairly, it looks like just a bunch of boxes, but there's a pretty intricate integration strategy going on here of what's connected. So with that, I'm gonna throw out another poll question. Brian, you can throw that up for me. The poll question is, does your organization have a formal integration plan? And we've got some great possible answers here. So take a second here. But yeah, Loretta, I think that's what we want to dive into here. Who's going to do this and how? And some of the next section here we want to jump into are what are the questions that associations are really asking themselves as they think about this concept and what they might want to do.
David, you used the word purposeful too, which is key. Really, what's the reality? Because a lot of times when we go in and meet with clients, there is a greater increased portfolio of products and apps that I think associations are working with now than they were 10 years ago. But I feel a lot of them have happened organically with not much strategy. They've just kind of a hodgepodge approach, kind of just grown. But again, and then the integration always feels kind of like backseat in terms of when really it should really be reversed in terms of the data flow, or at the very least, it needs to be a front and center question when they're looking at what different platforms and applications are they going to use.
Right. All right, let's take a look at the results and see what we got coming in. How are we guessing? All right. Yeah, I would feel that would be normal. So only one person answered they have a full integration plan that's well followed in a data ecosystem that's fully integrated. So
nice, kudos to you.
And it would be
you, Evan.
It would be interesting to hear, at some point from the people, they have an integration plan, not really followed, not fully implementing. They went to the trouble of putting together an integration plan. What's keeping them from implementing it, which are some of the challenges that we talked about already, right?
Maybe if we save some time, we'll force some people to get on the air with us, Loretta, and tell their story. All right, so let's get into a little bit what I was talking about and kind of some of the meat of what we want to cover. So, to get through this, you guys are probably hearing all these questions. These are the things I'm hearing, but we've got some your guys' expertise here on the line. So I'm going to pose some of these to you. I commonly hear that. And Loretta, this was to your point with where are people and what size. Do I really need more than one system to run my business?
Sometimes. Yeah, some people do, some people don't. But you can still, I think most organizations have at least 2 or 3 systems. So even if you just take basic things like marketing, something, even if you have a smaller organization, the AMS does a pretty good job, you're still going to have, like, email marketing is one. You want some kind of analytics on the other, at a minimum, I would think those two.
Financial management system is always a given. So that's a given. I wouldn't even necessarily count that because that's pretty much, yeah.
Another basic one, obviously, content management system. But for 10 years ago, a lot of the AMSs were trying to, a lot of the member-facing interfaces from their platform, and when responsive design came around, they were behind the curve on that. So I think the CMS is another big one too that obviously most used.
But it's really interesting, David, because I think the small associations are the ones who are typically going to stay with the model of having an AMS. And interestingly enough, with just an AMS as their primary system, and in my opinion, and one of the things too is that it's interesting because some of the vendors who deal with the smaller associations have built their systems to incorporate a lot of the functionality like Dave was just talking about.
Yep.
They're kind of sticking to the older model of we're going to be the content management system, we're going to do learning management, we're going to do all these things, trying to build it into one, because they, I guess, recognize that small associations certainly aren't typically structured to have somebody dealing with integrations and supporting that, et cetera.
So I think that also goes back to what problem you're trying to solve. Like, do I need more than one system? What are you trying to do?
Right.
So if you're a small organization that does 2 or 3 things and that stack fits you, then great, that's what you have.
So I'm not going to ask you to answer the question, but I know it's a question where he's here. What system is the best? And I think I can say it depends. One person's best system might be somebody else's worst. It really depends. Some are designed around what you do and what you need to do, and that's why you guys do evaluations and selections. That's why organizations spend a lot of time, and that's why there's so many different systems, because things meet different people's needs, right? But I think one of the things I always get, and we hear,
David, I think, again, like reading in the chat, Michael has a good point of, I think really good vendors actually do have ways to connect systems together, and it really stinks when the functionality is there, and then when you want them to integrate, they're not, you're pushing them. Yeah. So I think that's, regardless of the size of the organization, even if they have a basic integration strategy or basic number of partners, that they tell you what they are and they actually work. That would be really helpful. All right.
So I was going to say, I think that's one of the things, I agree with you 100% on that integration piece. One of the things we always hear as we go through stuff, especially as we're integrating a bunch of systems together, do I have to get rid of the systems that we've already paid for in order to have a data-centric ecosystem or something like that? I think that's a misconception. Everybody's always ready to throw away their AMS, and a lot of times that's not necessary. How many times have you gone through guys, doing a selection or an assessment where they're ready to get rid of their AMS, and you kind of relaunched it and made them fall back in love with it again, because when you take a lot of the stuff out of it, it's doing what it's meant to do.
But I think this is also a really good time to use the data lens to look at your systems, and if they're just okay, and then this may be a good factor to start weeding them out too.
Right, and there's also sometimes there is redundancy. Sometimes we see too, where you've got similar platforms doing similar things, and redundant. So I mean, yeah, sometimes obviously that's a good business to get rid of that, but I don't think you just needing to go in carte blanche and getting rid of your systems without doing your due diligence.
Right, but then Julie mentioned earlier, she said she would argue with me that you need to have data first, and then you analyze it later. This is another time where maybe you don't know what questions you should be asking, you don't know what's out there, and you take all the data you have and kind of mash it up and see what pops out. And that also, we've seen a couple organizations recently look at the data in all their systems, run the analytics against it, and then they had a better benchmark to start testing the quality. And you know, people say they use data from one source, but they were actually relying on the data from a different source. And so the analytics gave them a different picture of what they already had.
And and Mark Bernstein makes a good point on the chat around kind of, we're talking a lot about data, and this is, you know, theme here is a little bit about the data ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, one of the questions I hear a lot is, you know, what am I collecting that data that fits my business needs? And I think hopefully that's getting to your point, Mark, a little bit around, yeah, some of those business needs, you know, user experience, more transactions, more engagement, all those things that when we think of it, when we're hitting it from the data perspective, how are you going to know that some of those things are happening? And when you're selecting those systems that have been decoupled mainly to kind of have a better experience than maybe an AMS module might provide, and it's completely separate and they're focusing a lot of attention and money on a singular set of features, they still got to be able to collect and pass the right data and work within kind of an overall ecosystem and making sure you're doing that. Because we see a lot that don't, especially as you extend that capability to do financial transactions into multiple systems. It's not just data gathering.
It's tricky.
And I think that
tricky, and financial data is part of the data that we look at.
I think to Mark's point too is I think the user experience is a huge consideration when you're going through a selection process. I think the assumption for this conversation is that you've already got those systems based on the user experience. I mean, user experience is pushing to the top in terms of our selection criteria for systems these days. And that's the reason why you would be driven to not just have an AMS, because perhaps that doesn't provide the best user experience. That's why we get an ancillary system.
But I think the other thing we're seeing now is how can you use your data to make the member experience better, like make the member part of the conversation to say, we've been collecting all this data about you, so now we need to start sharing it with the member to make their experience better too, not just staff. And I think people are more willing to share data if they know how it will be used and how it might benefit them. I think we're getting there too.
Let's get into a little bit of how then.
How? Okay.
The how. So I know this is something you bring up, Gretchen. We've had it on a little bit, but what are your thoughts on kind of like how to establish an ecosystem? I think we've definitely played with, there's going to be certainly going to be different strategies for different size organizations. I think the main thing is there's no boilerplate approach. Everybody's got different business needs. Everybody's industry is slightly different. Everybody's members are slightly different. And there's enough variety out there in the world of systems that if you look hard enough, you're probably going to find something that might meet your very, very narrow need. And then you got to make it work kind of with your overall ecosystem from connectivity and function and user experience.
But I think the most important word there is ecosystem. So even if you're a small organization and you start with that frame of reference, that you go in knowing that you're going to connect at least 2 or 3 systems together, I think you set yourself up to be more successful, because you know you're going to have to at least do the basics. And if you just go in saying, I'm going to have a bunch of systems, I'm not really sure what that looks like, I think you're mentally not in the right place.
And I think we've talked a little bit about this, and there's some good, very timely guys on the chat, because this is what you're kind of talking about. But considering that, you know, you got to consider that long-term integration journey, and you know, and how many times are you talking to clients that, you know, they don't want to replace a system because it's hard. So and mainly because they haven't really constructed that ecosystem from the beginning. And this ties into some of that promise of a data hub model, but we've also heard this before. You know, this is another cyclical thing but as much as you can have that plug and play mentality, and that's, you know, I know we, being a data company, that's part of our pitch sometimes, and how we look at it is like, well, if all your data is centrally stored in a warehouse, it is much easier to replace a system and not have to think about that, oh my God, I got to migrate 10 years of data to a new system. No, you already have it. It's stored. It's there forever. So, you know, I think that is part of the long-term journey, is to really have a little bit thinking about the integration journey. What say you?
Right. Well, and this is where, like, data is a person, right? It needs to go through that whole path, and then I think that'll help you figure out where the connections really are. And somebody also said the quality of the data, like you're assuming it's
Right.
clean. It's not. And so that's another place where you can figure out, as the data is moving through the ecosystem and where it touches different systems, where do you get the best quality and where can you start shorting out bad data so it doesn't populate your entire framework.
Yeah, and I think that's getting into the next point here of what, you know, what data you need, where you need it, and why you need it. Why you need it, I think we probably add one more on there, is how you keep it updated and clean, right?
Mm-hmm. But this is one of the chicken and egg questions, right? How do I know what question I'm answering if I don't know the information I have to think about it? But if you have too much information, then it's overwhelming to figure out what you're analyzing.
And what's, from a practical perspective, Gretchen, what would you recommend for people? Are they spending those 6 months prior to converting to a new system cleaning data, or does it happen more right at the time that it's being converted? What's the best practice there?
So what I've seen recently that I think works really well is in the middle, is as you're wrapping up the selection and you're thinking about implementation, you use that window of time to use analytics to look at your data. So we've had two clients do this recently. So they analyzed the data, and then some of it they cleaned up as part of the data migration into the new system so that they could, and then they dropped some data that it didn't make the cut in the analytics routines. And then some of it can be cleaned up inside the new system because it just had better tools. But I think people can use that transition between I've signed off, I'm picking up my new AMS, you know, starting the hardcore setup. In the middle is where you should figure out what's going to happen with your data.
And then the other kind of thing we talk about is really, you know, as your stack grows, having that decision point to make sure you've maximized the capabilities of the system before you replace it or add to it, right?
People forget this. They never go back.
No, they never do. That's a good point.
So this would be a very important, you need to put the word stop, David, like stop and.
Right, because it's just like they forget what some of their systems do, or they don't know because it was never a plan when they put it in.
Right.
And then it becomes, you just keep adding, and you end up with a lot of redundancy and unused capability or unrealized capability, which, you know, that's waste of time and money in my mind.
But this also goes to Dan Hickey's point about data literacy. And the other thing if you're selecting any new system, whether it's an AMS or you're adding a new event management system or virtual events that everyone's doing now, that's a time to also to reset your glossary and your terms of understanding. And, you know, that's another opportunity to just look at what you have and weed out stuff that's not necessary anymore.
Right. We're not seeing much. We're not seeing that proactively happen right now, which we do need to see more of that in the space.
Yeah.
So how do people create data rules, Gretchen?
Well, they don't. This is really hard though, because this is one where everyone's really gung-ho in the beginning. They're like, okay, we're going to write all this down because we're never going to have the problem then when somebody leaves the organization or has a bad memory that you lose all that information. But this is very, very hard to maintain. Like, honestly.
Yeah, I think this is the hard part of that data hub model when so many systems are going to touch a data hub as pieces of building that kind of cloud data profile for a member of everything they do and everything they need. Because if you don't have a good rule system, right, things can be out of sync, or things can get overwritten, or things aren't always up to date, especially if you're trying to analyze a report over on the other end out of a analytics platform, or even back in the source system.
Yeah,
in theory, you know, if your rules aren't right and your flow's not right, you can have a lot of disconnected data.
But I'm also seeing some of the systems are doing a much better job helping you catalog and your data and help you identify visually like what's connected to different systems. So I am seeing the hub, like a mini hub inside of different systems, like event management systems will show you like, these are all the fields that we can integrate with another system. And then you can see which ones you've turned on and off. So I think there's little initial steps in helping automate this particular task.
So there's hope is what you're saying.
There's hope. Yes. Because people don't do it. This is boring and it's hard to do.
No, yeah. It's,
All right, let's get in a little deeper down into some tactics and let you guys talk through some things. We have our last poll question.
Oh, last poll. All right.
Brian can put that up. The question is, does your organization have a data strategy? 15, 20 seconds to talk about that. And I think some of this, we're going through this, some of this probably sounds hard, but a lot of it's not hard. It just takes time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and strategies don't have to be huge documents. So you can start with just a basic framework and then just fill it in over time. Make it a living document.
That's what we keep talking about, is just go simple out of the gate. I think that's why a lot of organizations struggle so much. They try to do too much too quickly, and just simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
Start there.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian, let's see the results. You guys probably wondering who I'm keep talking to is Brian. I'm not smart enough to run the poll, so she has to estimate what's on the poll. So we got
it's a tie.
48% with no, 15% with what's a, 4% don't know. So only about 40% actually have a data strategy on them.
Yeah.
Probably not surprised by that.
It's time.
What is a data
Not
strategy? Seriously, what is a data strategy, and succinctly stated?
You asking me or are you asking your team?
I'm asking anybody.
Well, the data strategy is the simplicity of a data strategy is, I think, back to the last bullet point on the last slide. What data you need, where you're going to store it, where you're going to consume it, how you're going to keep it up to date, then all the various rules and governance structure around that to keep it up to date. It doesn't have to be super complex.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this strategy part of it more is following it at every step of the journey. You're not, every time you add something or do something new, falling back to the strategy. Okay, we're adding this system. What are we going to do with this system? What new data is that bringing to us? What old data is that replacing? So it's really, to me, it's kind of a fundamental set of questions.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's like that the strategy needs to be the short document that's a reference, and then data governance and other operational tools build it out. So I think that's the other problem. People make strategies really long, but I think they should be as succinct as possible so they're easy for reference. And they should be written in business terms so that people in membership and marketing and other parts of the organization understand what it means.
I do like James's comment in the chat, if everybody's not reading it, and says, when do you start calling it a data strategy and stop calling it a hodgepodge of oral tradition email chat? Very good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I'm going to ask you guys, you and Dan, Loretta, Gretchen, a little bit of, how do organizations become successful with kind of building out an ecosystem where, data is at the center and there's a multitude of systems? You guys see this stuff all the time as you're helping organizations build digital strategy and digital transformation and selections. What are some of the steps that helps people be successful?
Well, it does start with the strategy. I think the integration strategy is a part of the data strategy. And I think that the integration plan, really what we're trying to get at is understanding what and how you're getting the data out of the system. We also talked about who at the end of the day is going to be responsible for these integrations. Because a lot of time, again, traditionally it's been IT, but really a lot of that needs to come more from the business side. I think we need to see more ownership of understanding, what is going to be your master data, where it's going to live in different areas, and how you need to get it out of the system. Right now, we're seeing a lack of ownership across the business, and so that's one of the things we kind of work with them on, is making sure that it's not just IT focused.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think ownership is something that we need to educate people, right? Because that's the new trend now. It's like these systems are owned by the business and IT's here as your partner. But I think there's a huge learning curve that successful organizations take the time and bring the business with you, because I think also IT professionals can learn a lot more about business, like why people are asking certain things, or are not just the black and white that IT like to live in. And then I think the other successful organizations have some kind of adoption, another strategy or model of how are you going to, this can't be, it's very difficult to do this as a project and then it's over. That repeat and keep layering and improving it is something that people need to do. And again, you forget because you move on to the next project and you lose some of the momentum.
And that's another thing too, Gretchen, we see is that it should be baked into your operations. I mean, there should be some, if you want to do business today, it should be baked into how you operate. We're still seeing it where it feels like a luxury or an add-on or something we'll get to at a later date. We just don't have the time, resources and energy. Sometimes that's true, but we're still seeing that though, or it's just deemed kind of an add-on or a luxury of sorts when really that's no longer the case. I mean, it really does need to be incorporated into your overall business operations.
Anything else, Loretta, that we're overlooking? It sounds simple. Just do it.
Yeah, very, very simple.
Yeah, I mean, I think the who is really important too to consider. I mean, you've got a bunch of systems. I mean, who is responsible for the actual physical integration piece of that, right? Mm-hmm. Is it the AMS vendor? Is it the FMS vendor? Is it the LMS vendor? Is it who's actually doing it?
Mm-hmm. And I think you need to figure out a plan to like work that out. Cause like we've had some, friendly, but kind of hard conversation with Association Analytics and the people in the middle, because they say, well, we're the receiver of your information and you're asking me all these questions about it. Go back to your vendor. And like, okay, fine. Go back to the vendor. They're like, we're just giving you the raw data. Go back to your analytics people and ask them what they're trying to do. And so I do think you need to figure out what the vendor relationship is going to be, especially for organizations that don't have an IT department who can be the translator in the middle. I think that's
right.
really, really hard.
And Michael just posted that. I mean, there's a lot of finger pointing. Anyone who's been in any kind of integration project has been involved in that. It's
mm-hmm. Right. That's a huge challenge to the successful implementation, is especially when you start to get away from having one main system, for lack of a better way of saying that, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the reasons why certain systems, we always recommend you get them once you've decided what the first system is going to be, because certain integrations have already been built. Another association is probably paid to have that integration built. So it's going to be easier for you to do it, right? Versus creating a whole other product. If your organization doesn't have a lot of money to spend on building an integration, go with the product potentially that's already had integrations built. But I think this is a very big topic, because you can't assume that it's going to be vendor X doing the integration just because you say it's needed.
Yes. Because
that's where you're going to reach the stumbling blocks. And then people start to become very disillusioned at the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we loosely use the term integration, thinking that
I was going to say, what is an integration, right?
Not all integrations are the same. And
no,
not all people
have to clearly define what that means to you. I mean, just using a really simple example of an FMS, right? So people sometimes go into it thinking that, well, all of my transactions are going to go back and forth between the two systems. That's really what it means.
Magically.
And the thing too is like being realistic about what you actually need, right?
Right.
Like, do you need much more than your just summary level data being brought over to your general ledger? Do you need that? Well, some organizations do, because they're issuing a ton of credits on a regular basis. So they need those that come out of the AMS to go back into their FMS. So clearly it's organization dependent. But again, part of the integration strategy and plan has to be, this vendor is responsible for doing this, and this is what it's going to cost me. This is how long it's going to take, etc.
Yeah, but I also think people try to push too much data back and forth because they're worried that they might lose something. And so I think that's the other discipline that people have to have some trust with their vendors too, to say, what's the lightest connection we can make between some of these systems? Then that lowers if the amount of data going back and forth is just the absolute minimum, like you said, Loretta, but people get worried. And so if they see a list, right, of here's all the fields you can integrate, they check every single one.
And isn't that some of the
integration strategy is upgrades?
Yeah.
Sorry,
David.
David.
David?
I just about the upgrades too. So part of the integration strategy, again, is just Upgrade. Every time you upgrade, and I saw a comment in there, the more systems you have in that your ecosystem, it just makes it much more challenging too every time you upgrade. Knowing that the AMS realistically for most associations are still going to be part of the hub for the foreseeable future, that needs to be part of it too, because the more you have more testing and making sure everything's thoroughly documented too.
Right. And that is one of the also trends we didn't touch on earlier, David, is people are starting to have middleware that's helping pull the integration layer up and building in some of those rules. I think that has been a big.
That's the promise of kind of part of the data hub, but it's that real integration plug and play layer. I'll just kind of keep moving here. I know, Gretchen, you had mentioned a little bit about addressing personas for your data and really thinking about, as you're thinking through these systems and thinking through what at the other end of the system, what data you're getting out of them, having actual personas around the data use, right?
And it more than one, you know, like what's your transactional data, what's your analytics data, what is, you know, like just break that out. And I think that also helps with the data literacy. The more you can give people examples of what data really means in the context of what problem you're trying to solve is really helpful.
I think the next slide kind of summarizes all the things we just talked about.
There we go.
I think the only word we didn't use was adoption.
I said adoption. We needed a bingo card, David, or a score sheet part of our.
These words. So this is really kind of in summation, all the things we were talking around tactically as you're going through building out an ecosystem. There's a lot of pieces to it that you have to address and think through. But just kind of in the wrap-up mode, you know, how do organizations adjust, transform, evolve, whatever word you want to use? And I'll kind of use this as a little bit of the takeaways and closing thoughts here.
I think this has to be more than just talking about it in the middle of an implementation or an upgrade. It has to be part of everyday conversation. So when you're doing that, even at a minimum, the annual budget process, and you're starting to talk about what systems do people need, and you have to pay for things, even if it's just once a year, and you kind of look through all the things you're using and refresh at a minimum.
Yeah, I second that. In terms of when you're looking to take on a new application, new system, the conversation around data needs to be part of the initial discussion, which we're seeing with varying success. Sometimes it's after the fact. But yeah, those discussions around data, how are you gonna access it, how are you gonna get out of the system, integrations all really need to be front and center when you're looking at any new application in your ecosystem.
And then I think you also have to have some kind of check and balance about if you're adding more data, then what data is coming out. Like use the analytics to tell you what's happening in your organization, but also what data is aging out, or is it being used, or you thought it would be really interesting to look at and it really didn't pan out that way. Like get rid of it and make room for other things. Because it gets overwhelming.
I think it's super exciting that there are systems like Acumen that are actually allowing organizations to make use of all this data that's been collected for years and years and years. One of the most valuable resources that an organization has. It's really exciting. How can we actually make it work, right? There's a lot of work that goes on beforehand to make sure that all the pieces fit together. So an organization has to be willing to invest in this. It is not going to be inexpensive. It's going to be worth it in the long run if you can actually make it work. Because the ultimate goal is to actually use that data to make it be a better user experience, to make it be that your organization makes great business decisions to support its strategic initiatives. And we have the technology today. It's just a question of how do we pull all the pieces together and make it work.
Yeah, and I know, David, you have the unstructured data, I think is one of your upcoming conversations, but I think that's even in this chat, right? If you could analyze that, a lot of the really good information, it doesn't have an official home. And so I think that's also the next generation of data analytics, which we couldn't do before. It was just, you had a feeling, right? Or you thought, I've seen this a couple times, I've heard somebody, and you're searching and searching. And so that's the other thing I think analytics is offering, some really, really good insight to just all these smaller conversations that are happening.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right, especially as we've gone through kind of the COVID stuff and everybody's moved everything to Zoom, and we've been doing these for 9 weeks now.
Yeah.
That's the question that comes back to us. Well, hey, and then all all the great stuff is really in the chat.
Right.
How do we bring that in? And even in the audio files, as the tools now transcribe that, and that's another piece of unstructured data you got to go through and pull out some of those pieces of it. So I think that's really a good closing. And since we're in a bowling reference, you know, I can only think of the great Ern McCracken, who would say, "You set them up and I'll knock them down." So we will move on. I do thank you guys for participating. It's always fun to hang out with my Delcor friends.
Yeah.
I think this was a
Yeah,
great.
thank you, David.
Thank you for having us, David.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate it.
And for everybody in the audience, we hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for all the great comments, good chat. So that's always important. Remember, this is a recurring meeting. So if you've signed up for this one, you're going to get reminders every week. You don't have to sign up again. We have great topics are listed here. You said the next 6 weeks of topics these are going through. We're continuing. Getting just great content, great panelists like we have today. We do want to see you at future events. And the next installment is going to be Power BI for association professionals, not data scientists. That's where we're going to focus on. Anybody can use Power BI to make data-informed decisions. You don't need a data scientist or a super data guru on your staff. You can really do some quick and easy things with Power BI. So once again, I say thank you for a fabulous discussion, Delcor. As I always say, I hope your minds are full and your cups are empty. And we hope to see many of you next week. So everybody have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks, David.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye-bye.